Hello and welcome. This is Dr. Cherie Johnson. We're going to be talking about week number 3. Thank you for joining me. This slide explains what we're doing in week 3 and why it matters for your work in human resource management. We're focusing on self-management, meaning what you do with your emotions in real time, not just what you know about them. In human resources, people watch your behavior under pressure, so your emotional intelligence shows up in observable actions like staying calm, listening well, choosing your words carefully, and responding instead of reacting. This week, I want you to connect those behaviors to outcomes you care about in the workplace. That includes stronger performance, more credible leadership, healthier team dynamics, and a more stable organizational climate. As you move through the week, keep asking yourself one simple question. What would someone be able to observe in me that signals emotional intelligence, especially when things get stressful? This slide builds directly on week 3 introduction that you just saw. We said this week is about self-management and how observable EI behaviors shape real-world workplace outcomes. Now I want to show you the roadmap for how we'll get there. First, in part 1, we start with emotions in contemporary human resources management. The key idea is that human resources practices do not just manage policies, they shape how people feel at work. We'll look at how common HR decisions can increase engagement or unintentionally contribute to exhaustion and emotional strain. Then in part 2, we shift to observable EI behaviors. I want you thinking like an HR professional who has to assess what is actually happening, not what people intend. We'll focus on behaviors you can see in daily work, like how someone communicates under pressure, responds to feedback, or handles conflict. Finally, part 3 connects it all to self-management and outcomes. This is where we get practical. You'll learn tactics you can apply immediately to improve judgment, strengthen leadership effectiveness, and support a healthier team climate. As you grow through this week, keep one thread in mind. We're moving from emotions to behaviors to outcomes so you can make better people decisions in real workplaces. This slide outlines the learning objectives for week 3, so you know exactly what you should be able to do by the end of the week. As you work through the readings and activities, keep these in front of you as your checklist. First, you should be able to explain how emotions shape perception, judgment, and decisions in human resources management. In other words, human resources decisions are rarely purely logical. Emotions influence what people notice, how they interpret fairness, and how they respond to policies and leaders. Second, you should be able to identify observable EI behaviors that support performance and leadership effectiveness. I want you thinking in behaviors, not labels. What does self-management look like in a meeting, during conflict, or under pressure? Third, you should be able to evaluate how HR practices influence positive emotions, exhaustion, and engagement. This is where you connect HR systems to the employee experience. You'll consider how practices like feedback, workload expectations, and recognition shape motivation and burnout. Finally, you should be able to use self-management routines to improve communication quality and workplace outcomes. This is the application piece. The goal is for you to leave this week with strategies you can actually use to communicate more effectively, regulate stress responses, and contribute to a healthier climate at work. These are your week 3 readings, and I want you to treat them as the evidence base for everything we do in discussion and activities this week. As you read, keep asking yourself one question. What EI behavior can I actually observe in the workplace, and what outcome does it influence? First, Felice and Weiss focus on developing emotional intelligence. As you work through it, look for practical strategies you can apply, especially around self-management and how EI can be intentionally strengthened over time. Second, Africa Jr. and colleagues connect Goldman's intrapersonal dimension of EI to effective leadership. When you read this one, pay attention to the internal skills leaders must manage, such as self-awareness and self-regulation, and how those show up in leadership decisions and credibility. Third, Jukanowitz and colleagues focus on the importance of emotions in contemporary human resource management. This reading helps you connect emotions to HR systems and practices, including engagement, exhaustion, and climate. By the end of the week, you should be able to pull at least one key idea from each article and use it to justify a human resources decision, a leadership response, or a self management tactic that you plan to test. In this section, I want you to notice the shift in modern HR. Human resources management cannot focus only on policies and procedures. It also has to account for employee emotions, especially in volatile, high pressure environments, because emotions strongly shape engagement, well being, and turnover decisions. The reading calls this the emotional paradigm in HRM. That means HR practices should be designed with the employee emotional experience in mind, not as an afterthought. What you implement, how you communicate it, and how consistently you apply it can either build trust and energy or create frustration with withdrawal. On the right side, here is the key mechanism the research tested. HRM practices influence engagement indirectly through two pathways. Positive emotions increase engagement, while exhaustion reduces it. So when you evaluate an HR practice, I want you to ask two practical questions. Does this practice increase positive emotion, and does it reduce exhaustion? Those two answers will help you predict whether engagement will rise or fall. On this slide, I want you to use a simple lens for reading week 3. Separate what leaders and HR do, what employees experience, and what results appear in the workplace. This helps you connect HR decisions to real outcomes rather than treating HR as paperwork. Start on the left with inputs. These are the practices employees feel day to day, such as role clarity and fairness, supportive supervision, growth and feedback, work design and workload, and the signals compensation sends. These are not neutral. Each one communicates value, priorities, and expectations. In the middle is employee experience and the emotional and energy response to those inputs. Strong HR practices tend to increase positive emotions, meaning trust, belonging, and psychological safety. Weak or inconsistent practices tend to increase stress and exhaustion. This middle column matters because it explains why the same policy can produce very different results depending on how it's delivered. On the right are the outcomes, what you can observe in the workplace. When the middle column is healthy, you typically see higher engagement and retention, better performance and citizenship behaviors, stronger team dynamics, more effective leadership, and a healthier organizational climate. When the middle column is unhealthy, those outcomes usually decline. As you work through this week, practice tracing a straight line from one specific HR input to one employee experience to one outcome you would expect to see. On this slide, I want you to notice this shift from ideas to behaviors. In human resources management, emotional intelligence is not just a trait you've claimed, it's something you can see, hear, and coach in real interactions. First, look at self awareness in action. A self aware person can name what they are feeling early, not after the situation escalates. They notice their triggers and patterns, especially in meetings where pressure shows up quickly. They also seek feedback and compare their self view with others, how others experience them. Most importantly, they align decisions with stated values and standards so their behavior matches what they say they believe. Now look at self management in action. This is what self awareness looks like when pressure hits. You'll see tone control, short pauses before responding, and professional boundaries that don't turn into shutting down or withdrawing. You'll also see recovery, meaning after a tense moment, they can reset and return to a steady baseline instead of carrying the stress into the next conversation. As you think like an HR professional, ask yourself one practical question. If I observe someone struggle in one of these areas, what would I coach them to do differently in the next 24 hours? On this slide, I want you to think of self-management as the bridge between awareness and action. It's not enough to notice what you feel. The goal is to choose a response that protects your professionalism, your relationships, and your results. First, look at the internal strategies. These are the tools you use within your body and mind. Start by regulating physical reactions because your breath, posture, and pace often signal stress before your words do. Next, prepare for predictable situations. If you already know what typically triggers you, plan your response before you walk into the meeting. Finally, use reflection and recovery. I want you to hear the difference between rest and true recovery. Recovery restores your capacity to think clearly and respond well, not just a pause in activity. Now look at the external strategies. These are the tools you use in your environment and in your interactions. Build accountability so your intentions turn into follow through. In HR work, good intentions without consistent behavior break trust really quickly. Seek to understand others' perspective before acting, especially when the issue is emotional or high stakes. After stress or conflict, strive for clarity. Do not assume people know what you meant. Clarify expectations, decisions, and next steps so the team can move forward. As you apply this, pick one internal strategy and one external strategy to test this week. Then ask yourself, what will people observe that tells them my self-management is improving? On this slide, I want you to notice that we're moving from concepts to evidence. In other words, we're not just saying emotional intelligence matters, we're looking at real world setting where it was tested and measured. First, look at the study snapshot. This research comes from the Ghana banking industry and uses a cross-sectional survey design. The sample included 260 employees from 4 commercial banks, and the analysis uses multiple regression. That matters because regression helps us estimate how strongly EI relates to leadership effectiveness while accounting for other factors. Now focus on the key findings. The study reports a significant positive relationship between self-awareness and leadership effectiveness. It also reports a significant positive relationship between self-management and leadership effectiveness. In plain terms, leaders who recognize and regulate their emotions tend to be rated as more effective. The final point is important for HR decision making. Demographics such as gender, age, education, and tenure influence these relationships. So when we apply EI development in organizations, we should not assume one approach works the same way for everyone. This is where HR comes in. Designing support and development is equitable, context aware, and responsive to the workforce. As you think about your own workplace, I want you to ask yourself one question. If I improve just one self-awareness behavior or one self-management behavior, what would people notice first in my leadership effectiveness? On this slide, I want you to shift your thinking from individual behavior to HR system design. The question is not only whether employees manage emotions well, it's whether HR practices create conditions that shape emotions and energy at work. First, notice the model that was tested. The study used structural equation modeling supported by confirming factor analysis with a large sample of about 1,000 employees. That's important because SEM lets researchers test relationship among multiple variables at the same time, including indirect effects, so not just simple one-to-one correlations. The main takeaway is this. HRM had a robust effect on 2 emotional pathways, positive emotions and exhaustion. So engagement is not just about motivation, it's also about the emotional experience HR helps produce through policies, workload design. Design HR systems that reliably increase positive emotions, not just occasional morale boosts. Think clarity, support development, recognition, and fair treatment that employees experience consistently. The second implication is a mindset shift. Exhaustion is not only an individual resilience issue, it's also an HR outcome that can be influenced through workload expectation, staffing, and role clarity and recovery norms. Finally, pay attention to context. The effects were stronger in large organizations and in the public sector. That means HR decisions should be tailored to organizational size and sector rather than assuming a one-size-fits-all approach. On this slide, I want you to see EI as a practical skill in the moments that matter in HR. These are high-stakes conversations where emotions are already present and your job is to keep the process fair, clear, and productive. First, performance feedback. Your goal is to lower threat and raise clarity. Set a calm pace, name the standard we're working toward, and focus on observable behavior and impact. Before deciding on next steps, ask the employee's interpretation so you respond to real issue, not your first assumption. Second, selection and interviews. EI here is about separating signal from emotion. Track your own reactions and potential biases as you gather evidence. Use structured questions so every candidate is evaluated consistently, and close the loop with clean documentation so decisions are defensible and transparent. Third, conflict mediation. The win is to slow escalation early before positions harden. Restate each side's needs accurately to show understanding and reduce defensiveness. Then move the conversation towards shared interests and end with one clear next action and one follow-up check-in so the agreement becomes behavior, not just words. As you apply this, pick one of these HR moments you've experienced and identify one EI move from the list that would have changed the outcome. On this slide, I want you to notice that small observable behaviors add up. Team culture is built not only through policies or mission statements, but also through everyday interactions and the emotional tone people experience repeatedly. When leaders manage their own reactions, they reduce the emotional noise that blocks problem solving. That matters because teams do better work when trust is higher and people don't have to spend energy managing tension, defensiveness, or uncertainty. HR also plays a direct role here. When HR systems reinforce positive emotion and reduce exhaustion, engagement becomes sustainable. In other words, good HR design helps people bring consistent energy and focus to their work over time. On the right side, I want you to track what improvement looks like in real life. You should see fewer recovery days after meetings. You should hear more direct feedback without people getting defensive. You should notice faster conflict repair, clearer decisions, and a stronger willingness to speak up and take initiative. As you reflect, pick one team you know well. Which of these signals would tell you the climate is improving and which would tell you the climate is actually slipping? For this activity, I want you to practice what emotionally intelligent human resources looks like in real time when the pressure is high and the employee is pushing back. You're in a performance conversation on a high workload team. The employee becomes defensive, claims the process is unfair, and questions your credibility. The goal is not to win the argument, it's to stay regulated, protect the relationship, and still move the performance issue forward. Step one is to observe. Identify what you feel in the moment and name the trigger. For example, you might notice frustration, embarrassment, or the urge to defend yourself. Just naming it helps you slow down and choose your next move on purpose. Step two is to regulate. Choose one self-management tactic and apply it immediately. Step three is decide how to reframe. Bring the conversation back to the standard, the support you will provide, and the next step. Step four is to follow through. Decide what you'll document and what you'll follow up on. Document facts, expectations, agreed actions, and timelines. As you work, I want you to write a short response for each step as if you are the HR professional in the room. As we wrap up week 3, I want you to leave with 3 clear takeaways you can use immediately in your HR work. First, emotions are not soft variables. They shape judgment, effort, engagement, and even how people interpret fairness. If we ignore emotions, we miss a major driver of performance and turnover. Second, emotional intelligence becomes practical when you translate it into observable behaviors. That means focusing on what you can see and hear, such as tone, pacing, listening, documentation habits, how you give feedback, and how you respond under pressure. Third, self-management is trainable. You do not have to wait until you're in a crisis to improve it. The best HR professionals build routines that help keep them steady in high-stakes moments like coaching, discipline, interviews, and conflict mediation. For practice next week, I want you to try a simple 5-day emotion log after meetings that matter. Keep it short and consistent. Write the trigger, the emotion label, the body signal you noticed, the action you took, and the outcome you got. Then choose one self-management strategy to strengthen this week and track it daily. Pick something specific and repeatable, like pausing before you respond, lowering your tone, slowing your pace, or doing a quick reset before a difficult conversation. The goal is progress through repetition, not perfection. Here is a list of the assigned readings that we've covered this week. And this brings us to the end of our week 3 presentation. I will see you in the next lesson. Thank you.